Biden calls for a pause in Israel-Hamas war to get the prisoners out. The president was responding to a question from a protester at a campaign reception in Minneapolis. President Joe Biden said Wednesday that a pause was needed in the Israel-Hamas war to allow more time to get prisoners out. "I think we need a pause," Biden said in response to a question from a protester who interrupted him at a campaign reception in Minnesota.
Very fine people on both sides. When I heard that, I knew.
Mr. President, if you care about Jewish people, as a rabbi, I need you to call for a ceasefire right now.
Asked to clarify what a pause meant, he said, "A pause means give time to get the prisoners out." Negotiations to free 239 hostages, including children and the elderly, have continued since Hamas' October 7 terrorist attack killed about 1,400 people in Israel. After Hamas breached Israel's border wall, other groups from Gaza seized additional captives. The protester, who identified herself as Rabbi Jessica Rosenberg, said she wanted Biden to call for a ceasefire. "Mr. President, you care about Jewish people. As a rabbi, I need you to call for a ceasefire right now," she said. After the crowd tried to quiet her, she said, "I would love for you to answer my question," at which point Biden called for a pause. He went on to say, "This is incredibly complicated for the Israelis. I can thoroughly understand the emotions on the Palestinian side of the argument and the Jewish side of the argument." A White House official later said Biden was not making a new policy announcement when he called for a pause in the fighting, but was emphasizing his belief that to aid in the release of additional hostages, a temporary ceasefire or pause would be necessary. The official said Biden was referring to as urging Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to temporarily halt the assault in part of Gaza to allow two American Israeli hostages, Natalie and Judith Ronan, to get out. The official said Netanyahu agreed to no Israeli airstrikes in that part of Gaza for that short period.
Today, thanks to concerted American leadership, we're in a situation where safe passage for wounded Palestinians and foreign nationals to exit Gaza has started. The American citizens are able to exit today as part of the first group of probably over 1,000. We'll see more of this process going on in the coming days. We're working nonstop to get Americans out of Gaza as soon and as safely as possible. This is the result of intense and urgent American diplomacy with our partners in the region. I personally spent a lot of time speaking with the Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel and the President Sisi of Egypt and others to make sure that we could open this access for people to get out. I want to thank our partners in the region, and particularly Qatar, who's worked so closely with us to support negotiations to facilitate the departure of these citizens. At the same time, we're continuing working to significantly step up the flow of critical humanitarian assistance into Gaza. The number of trucks entering Gaza continues to increase significantly, but we still have a long way to go. The United States is going to continue to drive humanitarian support for innocent people in Gaza who need help, and they do need help. We're going to continue to affirm that Israel has the right to responsibility to defend its citizens from terror, and it needs to do so in a manner that is consistent with international and humanitarian law that prioritizes the protection of citizens. We've all seen the devastating images from Gaza. Palestinian children crying out for lost parents, parents reasoning and writing their children's names on their hands and legs to be identified if the worst happens. It's okay. Kids are allowed to do that with me. Okay? Don't worry about it, all right? I don't blame her. Is it him or her? I don't blame her. Look, the loss of every innocent life is a tragedy. We grieve for those deaths and continue to grieve for the Israeli children and mothers who were brutally slaughtered by Hamas terrorists, and also continue to hold in our hearts the hundreds of families and loved ones, including small children and elderly grandparents, including American citizens being held hostage. My administration continues to work around the clock to reunite those families. We're not going to give up, period. We're not going to give up.
Biden said last week that the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza needed to increase after Secretary of State Antony Blinken said humanitarian pauses must be considered so food, water, medicine, and other essential humanitarian assistance can flow into Gaza. News reported at the time that according to a U.S. official, the White House supported a pause of indeterminate duration to allow more aid to reach Gaza and to enable those attempting passage out of the enclave to leave safely. A former National Security Advisor for Israel, retired Major General Yaakov Amidror told NBC News on Thursday that a broader ceasefire would be a huge mistake for Israel. An offensive has a momentum. And if you stop the momentum, to renew it is very costly and it gives the other side time to reorganize, Amidror said in a telephone interview from Israel. A war offensive can still account for a narrow corridor to take people through and get hostages out of Gaza, he said. People trapped in the Gaza Strip began evacuating through the Rafah border crossing Wednesday for the first time since Israel imposed its siege in the wake of the Hamas attacks. The crossing was opened after Egypt, Hamas, and Israel agreed to a deal allowing up to 500 people to cross daily. An initial group of U.S. citizens left Gaza through the crossing into Egypt, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said. More than 1 million people have been displaced in Gaza, and Palestinian health officials have said more than 8,700 people have been killed in the territory.